Okay, so the question I think everyone wants to know is like, are you supplementing with testosterone?
The answer is yes.
Hello, everyone. I'm Morgan, co-founder of Primal Kitchen and host of the Primal Kitchen podcast. I'm excited to have Mark here today, our founder and author of Primal Blueprint and the Keto Reset Diet. I don't really need to do too big of an intro on Mark. I know you guys all know him, but we've been doing a few of these chats, just Mark and I, and we thought it would be a fun one to do a reader-listener QA all about testosterone. Before we get started, a brief reminder that any and all opinions and views shared by hosts and guests on this podcast are the speaker's own and do not represent the view of Primal Kitchen or its affiliates or parent company. So, hello, Mark.
Hello, Morgan. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great.
And you are where in the world these days?
I am in Miami Beach, having returned from a week in California where I was meeting my new grandson. So,
congrats.
Daughter Devin had a baby 2 weeks ago, a little boy named Kai, just cute as a button. And then my granddaughter, JJ, who's now 2.5, very proud to be a big sister. So it's just all warm fuzzies here for me.
I love it. I love it. The Sisson family's growing. It's great.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So for those listening, why don't you give us just like a little background on testosterone? Like what's the big things people need to know about testosterone?
Well, I mean, this is a very complex topic. Testosterone is one of many hormones in the body. If we go wind back a little bit to how the body operates, we are basically this organism that's derived from DNA. The genes that are in the DNA are basically sets of instructions that tell different parts of the body what to do. These genes are little switches that turn on the manufacturing of protein, and sometimes they turn themselves off. So a lot of the control, the level of control above these switches is based on hormones that we secrete. And these hormones are often secreted in response to the environment. Sometimes they're just secreted endogenously because that's how the body operates. So testosterone is one of these hormones that has an effect of turning on certain genes. And most people know testosterone because it's the male androgenic hormone. The counterpart in females is estrogen. But testosterone is present in both men and women. It's made in some part by the adrenals, but mostly in the men by the testes. Women, ovaries do make a little bit of testosterone, but predominantly estrogen. So this testosterone at a certain level of development in males kind of describes the male predominant characteristics: larger muscle mass, thicker, stronger bones, hair, in places that women don't want hair, but men have hair, beards and things like that. And so it does sort of control early on the formation of a male. However, there's a lot of involvement with females as well. There's not as much testosterone present, but certain things like, again, some of the characteristics that women have, again, formation of muscle mass, bone density, bone strength, certainly libido in both men and women is a function of the amount of testosterone. But it gets quite complicated because testosterone, people talk about what I have, like low testosterone, high testosterone. What does that look like? Well, testosterone occurs in the body in a number of different forms. There's free testosterone, which is just circulating and available to be picked up by testosterone receptor sites. And then there's bound testosterone. And a lot of testosterone is bound to sex hormone binding globulin, which is you can actually test for. And so when you look at like the amount of testosterone in a blood test, for instance, it's a combination of this free testosterone and this bound testosterone. For men, and again, the age range is partly a factor in this, but men usually the total amount of testosterone, 260 to 300 nanograms per deciliter, up to about 1,000 nanograms per deciliter is a range that would be considered normal. But even within the normal range, there are variations and variables and factors. So you might encounter somebody who has relatively low testosterone but exhibits probably slightly more obvious male characteristics than someone else who has mid-range or higher testosterone, because we also talk about the receptor sites. So testosterone binds to a receptor site, and then that's what affects the turning on or off of a genetic switch. So it's not just the amount of testosterone that's circulating, there's also consideration given to the number of receptor sites that we have. So it's a very complex equation, if you will. And so when people discuss, what should I be doing? For my, testosterone, the maintenance of a healthy level of testosterone as a man, predominantly, but also, as a woman, a lot of these things have to factor into this. One example would be like stress. Stress stress increases cortisol, which cortisol suppresses the production of testosterone. So a lot of men who are under a great deal of stress have low testosterone, low T, as it's called in the ads.
Yeah.
You'll see, right? I have low T.
Yeah.
And so stress is something that you can't necessarily control for, other than dealing with it, in your own between your ears, in some regards. Some of the things that people, some diets can suppress testosterone. A diet that is high in soy isoflavones, and the elements that are what we would call estrogenic about soy have an anti-testosterone effect on some people, and males in particular. So there's diet, there's stress, there's lifting weights, lifting heavy things. One of the primal blueprint laws prompts the body to want to secrete a pulse of testosterone. This is a great evolutionary benefit that derives from the notion that if you stress the organism, you want the organism to A, survive, and B, build back a little bit stronger from that stress. That which doesn't kill me makes me stronger, per Nietzsche, right? So the idea that you go to the gym and lift heavy things and produce a pulse of testosterone and growth hormone, and as long as you don't suppress it with some stress or some dietary things, there is this effect that you become stronger as a result of this little pulse of testosterone that prompts muscles to build a little bit stronger, a little bit more powerful. So I'll leave. Sorry, that was a long introduction.
No, I love it. Yeah. Okay. So the question I think everyone wants to know is like, are you supplementing with testosterone?
The answer is yes. So again, very complex equation.
Yeah.
Do I have chronically low testosterone? No. But when I got to my early 60s, I recognized that I want to maintain muscle mass as long as I can throughout the latter part of my life. I'm in the second third of my life, and now anyway. So
who knows? You might be in the third quarter of your life. You were.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it could be. So when I looked at taking testosterone or not taking, I did a lot of research, and my physician said, absolutely, you should take it. There's no downside to taking it if you're an older person, because your body naturally slows down the production of testosterone. And in my case, because my physician knows that I like to push the envelope of athletic performance, and I'm going to be 69 in a couple of months, and I'm still playing, ultimate with 20 somethings and 30 somethings. There's a point at which that's going to be inappropriate, but right now, I'm trying to do that and avoid injury and maintain muscle mass. So there was and because they don't do performance drug testing for pickup games of ultimate. I'm not at risk of being suspended for 2 years from playing. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because it feels like a supplement, but it's treated like a steroid, like in a sense, right? It's almost like people look at it like, oh, you're on roids if you're taking testosterone. Is it shots? Is it pills? Is it creams? What is it?
Yeah. So you can. There are pills. There are creams. Some men take creams. Some men take pills. The pills sort of have to go through the liver to be incorporated into the body, and I'm not wild about that particular juncture there. The creams work for a lot of men, and they're compounded by a compounding pharmacy. If you're married, what you don't want is you don't want your spouse to be, rubbing up against you and getting some of your testosterone, in her system. So I do shots. I do a shot once a week. It's not much, but it's a sort of what I would call a maintenance.
Yeah.
And so I've been doing that for 6 years, 7 years. Yeah. Do I notice a difference because I've gone off for 6 months just to experiment. I don't even notice that much of a difference when I go off. So it's not like I have a loss of libido or a loss of energy or anything like that. But the research that I've done would suggest to me that there's no sort of danger or contraindication of continuing to take it. And one of the things that happens is if you start to supplement with testosterone, you probably are going to do that for the rest of your life. But it's easy. It's something I've chosen to do. And I think our audience has heard me talk a lot about muscle mass and maintaining muscle mass being probably the primary ingredient in longevity, and a lot of reasons for that. But basically, the more muscle you can maintain as you get older, muscle is that metabolic tissue that requires input from a lot of other areas, like muscle mass. When you use it, when you work it, when you're playing, running, jumping, throwing, lifting, it's the muscle mass that requires the heart to beat more forcefully, right? The heart is saying, look, the guy chose to use his muscles and the demand is increased. So now I have to pump more blood, more oxygen and fuel to those muscle sites. Meanwhile, the lungs are saying, well, I have to breathe in more deeply. I have to be strong at inspiring, at inspiration to provide the oxygen. And the liver has to work harder to keep up and provide some of the substrates for energy and so on and so forth. So every organ in the body benefits from you maintaining lean muscle mass. And the longer you can do this, it's a concept that we call organ reserve. The longer you can do this, the higher organ reserve you have. So in the event that you get sick, and it may be, for instance, so many people who died of COVID last year would have survived had they had greater organ reserve, had they had greater capacity to withstand this viral onslaught that they had.
Interesting.
The other, I think, component of this is just avoiding injury. Again, the prototypical end-of-life experience that we sort of read about is, the 80-year-old person who gets up in the middle of the night to go pee because his, prostate is swollen and his bladder is weak, trips over the cat, falls, and because that person hasn't built the muscle mass and the strength and the balance to regain balance after tripping, falls, puts a hand out or falls on the hip. And because the muscles haven't been working enough to prompt the bones to get stronger and maintain a rigid structure, the bone breaks. And now the person winds up in the hospital lying in a bed, immobile for weeks at a time. And hospitals are where people go to die. I'm sorry. I do whatever you can to keep me out of a hospital.
Yeah, they get a staph infection at the hospital and then
they get a staph infection, or they get, pneumonia for lying in bed for so long. And then because they can't, cough forcefully because their lungs have not been prompted to act, again, all based on this organ reserve, all based on muscle mass, they can't cough up the sputum, and typically they'll die of congestive heart failure. And again, because the heart at some point can't keep up with the increased demands of an infection. So I hate to paint this horrible picture, but that's sort of an end of life experience for a lot of people.
Yeah.
The more you can maintain muscle mass and the more and by the way, you can't just do it by taking steroids. You actually have to do the work, right? And that's back to, there are no real shortcuts here, but one of the assistants to helping this happen is if you're a male and you're in your later part of your life and you want to maintain muscle mass, it's worth discussing with your physician.
Yeah. And then do they like do blood work every like 6 months or like how do
So
they
sure, I get blood drawn every 6 months. It's just a sort of a check-in to see what's happening. But there's no, again, so far I've been doing this, been no contraindications of any kind.
Yeah. And there's, I mean, HGH and stuff is something I feel like that, a little bit less talked about, but than testosterone, but something that people would be doing in addition to that. Are you doing any HGH?
Not yet. And that's one of those ones that I haven't, I've looked at it, and that's one of the ones I'm still a little concerned about the possibility of prompting the growth of its human growth hormone, the growth of other cells that might be acting up and going down a path of precancerous things like that. So it's not to say, I mean, I've done enough research, and there'll probably be a time at which I'll do it, because while testosterone is kind of largely involved in muscle growth and other sort of male characteristics, and somewhat in the connective tissue, HGH is really involved in connective tissue. That's the cartilaginous parts of us, the collagenous parts of us, the tendons, ligaments, fascia, connective tissue, all of those things for which we supplement with collagen.
Yeah.
That's where growth hormone comes. So I'm not discounting the fact that I might hate to use the word play around with that at some point, but I might.
Yeah. Well, some people are worried, like, what if you have precancerous cells, like the human growth hormone spurs the growth of them faster,
correct.
Like accelerate cancer in the body.
Yeah.
But as you get older, your risk, the cells are slow down anyway. So they say like, if you can get past like 80, your chance of cancer being deadly is very low because the cells aren't growing.
For sure. I mean, it's that, there's a thing in the urology community that says that every person, every man over 75 or 78 who dies with prostate cancer, not of prostate cancer, but with, in other words, it's, sort of part of the process that the body goes through. I mean, my dad had a kidney cancer when he was 83. He got diagnosed and he was given 2 weeks to 2 months to live. And he lived over five years longer.
That's cool.
And had some of the best days of his life, because every day he woke up, he thought, is today my last day, right? So it was a weird, and it was an inappropriate diagnosis by the doctor. But the point was that cancer that was discovered because my dad hated doctors, hated going to see a doctor, had gone for another complaint, and then a scan showed this tumor on his kidneys, close to his heart. And so, the doctor, all of a sudden, the doctor, rushes to this diagnosis and this prognosis. But I suspect that cancer had already been growing for 20 years, and it's slow growing kind of thing. So, so it's, it's one of those things that, you have to kind of look at where you are in your life and what are the complaints you're trying to address right now. Like young males have no reason to be supplementing with testosterone unless they're, want to be on the cover of a bodybuilding magazine.
Yeah, talk about that, because one of the questions that came in was like, my boyfriend wants to do it, and he's 28 with healthy testosterone levels. Like, what do you think about young men doing this kind of stuff?
I mean, what I think about it is I would personally put it off for as long as I can.
Got it.
And I would take advantage of my youth at that time. There are supplements that you can take that, well, first things you have to control for, are you eating well? Because if you're not eating well, then there's no reason to try and bypass it.
You can't supplement your way out of that one.
You can't supplement. Yeah. You can't exercise your way out of a bad diet. You can't supplement your way out of a bad diet. And then are you controlling stress? Are you in a job that's stressful? Are you doing all the things in your life that would otherwise support your normal testosterone production, and put you at the top of the top of the heap. I played Ultimate last week with a friend of my son's who's a great athlete who had torn his hamstring in a game 2 weeks before. And whereas I would have been sidelined for 6 months, this guy comes back 2 weeks later and says, I'll play a little bit and I'll mostly throw, I'll be a quarterback. Next thing you know, he's doing some runs and doing some jumps. And I'm like, it's because he's 29 years old, and his testosterone, his normal testosterone is so high, he recovered from all of this.
Yeah.
Then there are some supplements you can take. Vitamin D, like if you're low in vitamin D is one of the sort of precursor steroid hormones to testosterone. You can take DHEA, which is a common supplement that people take. You can take fenugreek, which sort of prevents the aromatization of male testosterone to estrogen. So some men produce a fair amount of testosterone, but then they have these enzyme systems in the body that either, again, result of stress, or result of too much soy, a lot of other factors, can aromatize some of their own testosterone into estrogen and cause the antithetical effects, if you will, toward the energetic route that most men want to go down. So there are a lot of things that you can do prior to supplementing, with testosterone.
Yeah. And do you think, like, if you had been less healthy and less fit and gone on testosterone, you would have noticed like bigger difference? Like,
yeah. No, it's interesting that you say that, because if I'd been less healthy and less fit, I probably would have noticed, I don't know. I'm trying to put myself in that headspace where if I didn't work out and then I started on a program and started then lifting, I'd really notice some things.
Well, and with supplementing, like, that's what I'm curious about. Like someone who's maybe like been a little bit less healthy, and like, cause there's a lot of like, what do they say testosterone does? But I mean, increase libido, increase energy, like what would be the
increase fat? It's all the things you want, right?
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing. And I think, if you look at the millions of the tens of millions of men, probably hundreds of millions now, but tens of millions of men, and way more tens of millions of women who are, peri, postmenopausal, who are on, hormone replacement therapies, bioidentical being the sort of primary word. Women have no problem taking these topical estrogen, progesterone, even testosterone replacement therapies. So, I think it's a common part of the anti-aging medicine route that people will take now. And what I would say is I would just put it off as long as I possibly can. And
once you're on it, you're kind of on it.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly.
That makes sense. Okay. What are some other things you can do to support testosterone before you go in, like before you're ready to do?
Yeah. So again, you just get your diet right.
Yeah.
That means plenty of, cut back on the sugars and the inflammatory oils, and increase your intake of healthy fat. Make sure your protein levels are up there.
On the diet, really quick, I have to tell you this. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but when I first started working for you, so I had been like pescatarian for years, like 6 years. And I went to see a naturopathic doctor. She tested all my hormones and everything. And I was probably, like 29 at the time, maybe 30. She was like, I've never seen testosterone levels so low in a 30-year-old female. Like, this is like something I would see in a perimenopausal woman. Like, and I think it was because I wasn't eating nearly enough animal protein, quite honestly. Like, is there a link there?
I'd agree 100%.
Yeah.
I would agree 100%. I have a real, issue with vegan, the sort of the vegan approach, and in many cases the pescatarian approach. And a lot of times, especially female pescatarians, you're basically a vegan eating a little bit of fish once in a while.
Yeah, it was like once a week you eat salmon.
Yeah, so
you go out to dinner, you order salmon.
Yeah. No, exactly. So that's not enough to support healthy levels of these, of the healthy fats and the protein levels that you want in your body. And you want not just protein, but you want, high quality protein, because the body, some of these vegan protein supplements that you see are so inefficient in their digestibility and their assimilability that, you could barely call them protein supplements.
Yeah.
So diet is a big thing there. I think controlling stress, as I said, huge. I would say lifting weights. This is one of the reasons that I got so on board with lifting weights, even though I'd been an endurance athlete most of my life. As an endurance athlete, I had low testosterone. And when I started lifting, my testosterone improved or increased. I'll give you a little interesting story about doping in the Tour de France. So most of the guys who were guilty of doping, of using testosterone in the Tour de France, were not trying to become Superman. They were literally trying to wake up the next morning and be able to go get in the race again and do another hard 160-mile day. So when you have somebody like Floyd Landis, who won the Tour in 2007, tested positive for exogenous testosterone, he didn't have a high level of testosterone. He still had a very low level of testosterone when he tested. It was just that he had supplemented with a type of testosterone that they can identify through mass spectrometry, and that's what he was found guilty of having doped, of having taken exogenous testosterone into his body. But it wasn't like these guys are all trying to get buff and huge and from that. It's literally their testosterone is so chronically low from the amount of training that they're doing that there are some days you wake up and you're like, if you were training, you'd say, I got to go to the hospital. I feel like shit. But if you're 14 days into a 21-day race, you can't wake up that morning leading the entire race and go, I feel like shit. I can't. Now, I'm not defending what these guys did, but I'm telling you the reason they did it was to offset this horrible depletion that happens as a result of chronic endurance training. So when I was a marathon or triathlete, I had relatively lower levels of testosterone than I did in my 50s because chronic training will deplete testosterone in men and women. And that isn't just the reason that you see skinny marathoners with no upper body, even though they try to lift weights, but you also see injuries, skeletal injuries, bone bruises and fractures and things like that, because there's a relatively lower level of testosterone to repair the daily damage done because of this chronic level of training. So the antithesis of that, and one of the reasons that I haven't run a mile in 25 years, like I literally haven't put on running shoes and gone out the door to run a mile in 25 years. Now, I've tried like 4 times. I got like 200 yards down the road. I'm like, what am I doing? This is A, it's not fun. B, I have no interest in doing this. And so I turn around and walk home. Now I sprint because sprinting is a form of powerful exertion, and it's almost a form of lifting weights. The amount of force generated in the muscles and on the bones is multiples of what is generated if you're jogging or just doing endurance training. So a sprint, I lift heavy weights, and lifting heavy weights doesn't mean lifting every day. It means once in a while. It means doing that hard weight workout and then giving yourself rest so that your body, not only do you recover from that workout, but you build back stronger from that workout. So one of the dangers of people who get into my lifestyle is I gotta work out every day, and I gotta do 2 hours in the gym every day. And if I miss a day, I feel like I've done myself a disservice. No, you have to really, the whole concept of training is to break it down a little bit, give that little pulse of testosterone and growth hormone, and then allow good nutrition and rest so you build back a little bit stronger. And it's a fine line, between what is enough to cause the body to want to respond and what is too much to cause the body to then go down this hole of overtraining.
Yep. Interesting. Yeah. Why is testosterone such a big deal in doping though? Like, why can't, I mean, it seems like, I don't know.
Well, you know, so
like, do you think it's overregulated? Like they should just be allowing it, or what do you think on testosterone?
well, I can say this now, but you know, for 15 years, I was the anti-doping commissioner of the sport of triathlon worldwide. So I literally, you know, I and a friend of mine, Craig Masbach, wrote the anti-doping rules for the sport of triathlon worldwide back in the early 90s. And I administered, you know, I was the one who was responsible for overseeing every positive test for a lot of years. And through those years, I had this nagging feeling like, here we have these drugs that are actually medicine. They're not poisons, they're medicines that people are taking to improve their performance. And in some cases, like testosterone, you've got 100,000 kids or 1 million kids who want to become the best in the world at what they do. And they're training their asses off. And in most cases, they're overtraining. And this is particularly true with distance events, distance and endurance races like, you know, triathlons and marathons and swimming and things like that. These kids are training their asses off. And there's only room for one best in the world. There's only one gold medalist.
Right.
There's only one world record holder. And so, yet you feed these hundreds of thousands of kids into the system. And as they become better and better at it, and they start to develop to become among the best in the world in their 20s, then you say, okay, you got to train your ass off, and we're going to deny you access to the same medicines we give any poor schlub who walked into an emergency room on Monday morning and said, geez, doc, I overdid it. And you know, what do you got for me? So it's a little bit hypocritical to be training kids and even elite athletes that hard and then deny them access. And, you know, a great example would be the NFL. I mean, the NFL, these guys, you know, teams have 50 million, 100 million, $200 million invested in these athletes. And then to somehow say you can't take these medicines to, you know, allow you to recover enough to play in 3 weeks rather than 3 months. I always found that, you know, these are modern day gladiators. I don't think the public really cares if they're taking medicines to help them perform. The public wants to see, you know, world records and higher and stronger and faster and
good games and totally
good games. And so over the years, I realized that the people who cared the most about doping in sports was the media. The media just wanted something salacious to write about. But so I feel like in a perfect world, professional athletes, not students, not kids, but professional athletes would be allowed access to test, say, up to a certain level that was considered safe and appropriate for recovery. And beyond that, if you tested positive, it wasn't like you were ostracized, excommunicated, a bad person, a cheater. It's like an infraction. Oh, you got to sit the next game out, you know, until your levels come back down again. You have to sit out. That's sort of what I would have done with this.
Interesting.
But, you know, like, I don't know what happened with the skater, the Russian skater in the Olympics. Did you see that story about the 15-year-old girl?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know,
tell everyone what happened. I don't.
Well, I didn't pay that much attention to it myself, but she had a positive test for some
performance enhancing drug, something.
A drug that was on the performance enhancing list. And sometimes these lists, there's no rhyme or reason. Like, you know, if you're a cross-country skier or biathlete in the Winter Olympics, almost invariably you have exercise-induced asthma from breathing in this dry, cold air your whole life. And so even though albuterol, salmeterol, these inhalers are considered banned substances because they open up your lungs and they can enhance performance, virtually every endurance skier has a therapeutic use exemption because they got diagnosed with exercise asthma. So it makes sense that you should be allowed to use this, but then if you don't have the diagnosis, now you're again, you serve a you serve a 2-year suspension for using it, right?
Got it.
So there's these, and so some of the medicines that are on the list are not that,
Agreed.
are not that dangerous.
Yeah.
For the longest time, and it may be cannabis, THC, dope, pot was on the list of banned substances, and yet it's the exact opposite of a performance enhancer if you're doing a sprint event. But the reason for its existence apparently is that because it gives you an unfair advantage of quieting the nerves down the night before a big race, it's on the list. I mean, seriously?
Yeah.
One of the first cases of an athlete, I forget his name. I think it was Ross Reglabuti or something like that, a snowboarder. In the first time that snowboarding was in the Olympic Games, got, his sample came back positive for THC. He'd smoked a joint the night before, or maybe even the day of a half pipe run. Well, the half pipe is a freaking dangerous.
Yeah.
People, have died. People have broken their necks, had traumatic brain injuries from hitting the edge of the ice, stuff like that. So, they considered that the fact that you would take a hit off of a bong before an event to be a performance enhancer because it quieted your nerves down. And yet they let them wear, headphones where they're playing Nirvana or, some heavy metal shit. I don't know. There's no rhyme or reason. I'm sorry, I didn't mean for this conversation to sort of wander into the area of.
No, I think it's interesting because it's like, that's where most people know about testosterone supplementation, right? Like, and so it has this big media, like scary thing, and people think, oh my God, you're on steroids. And it's like, really? Like, I mean, this is no different than supplementing, I don't know, if you have low iron levels or magnesium, if you have.
Correct. And where it gets dicey is you have men, I take a bioidentical isomer of testosterone, but then there are labs that make these variations of androgenic hormones that have other effects. So that's where the bodybuilders come in, and they'll say some of them are, like nandrolone is a huge muscle builder, but it's also involved in speeding up the repair of torn tissue. So it was a favorite among sprinters in the 70s and 80s.
And sorry, nandrolone, is that like
nandrolone? Yeah, it's called decadurabolin, but the nandrolone was a primary form of a steroid hormone that was a positive test.
Okay, got it.
But then you have now weightlifters, bodybuilders taking trenbolone. Trenbolone is an animal steroid. It increases the size of animals that you're going to fatten up for slaughter. But a lot of bodybuilders take that because of its water retention properties and its building properties. So a lot of variations of the male testosterone that get incorporated and get abused, I would say.
I hear you. Yeah.
And so that's where because bodybuilders don't put on 120 pounds of muscle just because they increased their testosterone levels. There's often a lot more to that.
Yeah. And so the testosterone form you are most, either you like the best, would be like a compounded pharmacy bioidentical type of a testosterone.
Yeah, it's a cypionate. It's a standard. There's enanthate, cypionate, propionate. There's 3 different basic esters. You find the one that that works best. They're all sort of similar. I don't know. I think some get taken up by some people better than others.
Yeah, interesting.
I have no attachment to any one of them.
Okay. Yeah, got it. All right. Well, this was awesome. I feel like I got a nice, good lesson in testosterone. Thanks so much. We'll have to do the next reader Q&A on the next subject soon.
Cool. I agree. Let's do it.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Bye.